Welcome to the Paradise Paradox. My name is Aaron Battle.
My name's Kurt Robinson.
In this episode, we're going to go through the evolution of Kurt, going from why do we have government?
Yep.
What government actually does, and maybe we don't actually need them.
Yeah, kick them out the door. So this is a personal story of mine of how I evolved philosophically from questioning whether government should be involved in directing people's personal liberties, control over their own bodies, to eventually, over many years, coming to the realization that maybe we don't need government at all. So press like, press subscribe, check us out on iTunes, Pocket Casts, and Facebook. And remember to toss us a few bones at donate.theparadiseparadox.com.
Press like on YouTube. Press like on Facebook. Subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, and Pocket Casts. Follow us on Twitter at BattleAZ and Trouble Bubble. And show your support at donate.theparadiseparadox.com.
Today I'm going to tell you a little story about how I became a libertarian and an anarchist.
It'll be interesting for me because I'm still early on that path.
Yeah.
A lot of these concepts are still fairly fresh to me. So although I resonate with them, it'd be cool to hear where you're coming from and what events actually started making you interested.
Yeah.
Going down this road.
Cool. Okay. Well, I'll start with. I remember when I was 16 or 15 or 16, a lot of my friends liked to smoke weed, and that was fine. But the thing was, smoking weed was illegal, and people would hate us because of that. Some of my friends would hate my other friends. There's like some weird faction between people who like drinking and people who like smoking up, and the thing was, I said, well, hang on. I mean, like drinking is legal, not for us because we're underage, but drinking is legal. Why isn't smoking weed legal? And I remember my friend Nick would be like, well, look, it's just illegal. That's the way it is. You just need to accept that. That's the society we live in. And I said, well, hold on. At some point in history, drinking alcohol was actually illegal. And he said, yeah, and that was fucked. And I was like, well, you're applying this double standard. Somehow you think that's a perfectly reasonable thought, that you can do what you want. It's legal for you to do what you want, and you don't have to face any criminal penalties for that. But if I want to do what I want, then I do. So where is the logic to that? And of course, there's no real logical answer to that. It doesn't make sense why alcohol should be legal while marijuana isn't. To some extent, I think there's, if you want to talk about harm reduction, if you believe that prohibition actually worked, then you would have much more of a case for banning alcohol than you would for marijuana. But the other thing is, why shouldn't people be able to do what they want with their own bodies? I mean, it is their body, so that seemed perfectly logical to me.
Yeah, the concept of like community health is like it would be the other way around.
Yeah. If prohibition actually worked, which it doesn't, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why it doesn't work. Basically, by threatening people, you don't actually restrict the demand for a product, or at least not enough to make people any healthier, and it leads to a whole bunch of problems with low quality. And I would see things like an ad talking about how dangerous ecstasy is, and it's got like a picture of a bath and a toilet, and it's really dirty, and it says, "Ecstasy, do you know what you're taking?" And I was like, but come on, I mean, whose fault is that? It's not our fault that we don't know what we're taking. It's actually your fault. It's the people who banned it. That's the problem. Because when something is banned, it means it can't be regulated as easily as in a free market, because people want to know what they're consuming, and that's a lot more difficult when it's banned, when there's criminal characters running around trying to make a quick deal, rather than having it all out in the open and letting people distinguish and letting people freely advertise what they're actually selling.
Not to mention the effects on price.
Yeah.
It's just complete exploitation of anyone that wants to use those products or substances.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to look at things like, okay, if I buy, let's do a comparison here. Say if I buy a beer in Australia, well, let's say if I buy it from a supermarket, it costs like $3. If I buy it in the supermarket in Colombia, it'll cost like $1. And that's a difference made by taxes in Australia mainly. But it's the thing is, if we look at the difference between cocaine in Colombia, it's about $5 a gram. You could probably find somebody to sell you a gram for $2 if you're savvy. In Australia, talking about $300 for a gram, and I don't know who's paying that much, because it's I
know a few.
Yeah, it seems like such a boring thing to spend your money on, but that's their right.
Each to their own.
Yeah. So anyway, so not all of these ideas were going through my head when I was 16, but that was the key one. Like, we like to do what we want, and why should we be banned from that? Why should we have threats against us? And I did start calling myself a libertarian then, because I didn't think it through completely. I still had some ideas, like leftist ideas. I thought that the government had a role in making people happy, which made sense to me at the time, and now I see it's a bit utopian. I had this vision of like where if people wanted something in their life, if people wanted to find a partner, like the government should provide a dating service. But now, if I think about that, like the government running a dating service, I could picture some weird Orwellian or Kafkaesque world where the government is lining people up and forcing them to get married. That's what it brings to mind now.
Interesting, because you just said that the government has the role to make the community happy or increase.
That was my thought then when I was 15.
Well, I think maybe there's still a lot of people that might believe that to some extent, because if it was the latter and government's role was not to care about people, then people probably wouldn't care much for government. But they probably haven't realized that the government are either side of the fence, and most of them don't care about the people. And the ones that do care about the people, they're looking after niche, I guess, movements,
niche markets, niche
needs of the community.
Yeah, and. Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit divided on this, because I know some politicians are nasty and they lie. I mean, I think a lot of them do. But I also think sometimes that they're confined by the system. Maybe they actually have a lot of good intentions, but they're restricted. Like, for example, recently, Senator David Leyonhjelm, the Liberal Democrat senator in Australia, got elected, and he made his maiden speech, and he said he was talking about classical liberal principles, like libertarian principles, like the right to your own body and the right to self-defense and freedom. Like, that's a word you don't hear in Australian Parliament too often, at least not in the way he was using it.
How did it go down?
Well, in a lot of ways, it went down great. He said a lot of senators came up to him afterward and they said, wow, I wish I could make a speech like that, talking about real shit, like talking about principles, but my party won't let me. So people get tied down. People have to toe the party line. And that's a whole problem with politics. It's a system that divides people, and you have to stick with who you stick with. Otherwise, they're not going to have your back, and you get all kinds of backstabbing. All manners, all flavors, all kinds. Anything could be used as a weapon to stab in your back. Yeah. So I've heard one ex-politician describe it as in Australian politics, and probably in politics in general, the people would stab you in the back, then use those daggers as rungs to work their way up. So, yeah. So I had this idea that government had some kind of role in making people happy, which now I think I was misguided, because I don't think the government can make people happy, and I don't think they have a role, because I think that's up to an individual's responsibility. You have your own life, and you have the right to pursuit of happiness, and you're the only one who can do it. If a government starts getting involved, they're only going to get in the way. The thing that I didn't realize is how a government is funded, which is by taxes, and that's actually a form of theft. At least by one definition. Like the definition of theft that I normally use is controlling the property of another with the intent to deprive him of it. Some people will try to argue with me and say that it's not theft because it's something that you pay in exchange for services. And I say, well, in what other context would I have to pay for something even if I don't use it? Like if McDonald's came knocking on my door and said, hey, you have to give us $100 for your monthly subscription. And I say, but hold on, I don't eat at McDonald's. So why do I have to pay? And they say, well, you still have to pay because this is an exchange for services. No, that's not an exchange for services. That's a shakedown. That's extortion, especially, when they have in this hypothetical extreme situation.
The only other example I can think of might be insurance. But what are you trying to insure, and what are you expecting in return?
Well, who forces you to pay insurance? Like, it's your responsibility to take care of your own house, your own health, and your own property. So who forces you to insure it?
I see the difference.
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, using Australia as an example.
Yeah.
The only insurance that you're forced to is like, your green slip, which is like your third party.
Yeah, compulsory third party. It's personal injury. So if somebody gets injured because of something that you did in your vehicle, that will cover them for the damages. But who forces you to do it?
That's the key.
The Roads and Traffic Authority forces you. A government department forces you to do it. And so that's what government does. Government is force. Government is a monopoly on force in a certain geographical region. That's what government is. And but I didn't realize that at the time, and I hadn't thought through my ideas fully. But I did identify as a libertarian for many, many years. Like,
when you were asking these questions, how old were you?
So when I was asking about the right to one's own body, like the right to consume the drugs that you want to, I was about 15 or 16. But I never thought about the question of taxes until about 13 years later. Yeah, I just kind of accepted. Well, to some extent, I accepted the taxes. But then I remember I started reading Robert Kiyosaki, and he's talking about how he structured his company so he really doesn't have to pay tax. And I thought, that sounds pretty good.
You're allowed to do that? I know when I first came across that topic, it was you're allowed to mitigate your tax.
Yeah.
Like that's a business function.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's part of the reason why taxes are fundamentally unjust. Something like the income tax it's inherently regressive, which taxes aren't supposed to be, because the thing is, you can write off your expenses if you're a business or a corporation. You write off your expenses, but you can never write off your time. And the people at the bottom of the ladder are the ones who are trading time for money, whereas the people at the top of the ladder are trading money to get more money. So that's the thing about it. It's so regressive, and especially that's about the income tax. And so the income tax almost always targets middle and lower class people, whereas upper class people with political sway, tend to receive subsidies. So basically the people who game the system manage to, they either pay very little tax, or they manage to actually receive money instead of paying tax.
Sneaky.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny because a lot of leftists, socialists will talk about how the role of taxation is so important, or they say stuff like tax the rich. Well, that's actually how the income tax got started in the United States. That is, that was the public relations scheme to sell the income tax to the people. They said, if we just put a small tax on all these millionaires in the United States, and millionaires was it was very uncommon to be a millionaire, because at that time money still had money wasn't fiat currency. The currency supply hadn't been so diluted. So a millionaire to have $1 million was a lot of money.
You're a king.
Yep. It's like the equivalent of being a billionaire today, or being having $500 million, something like that. So the thing was, they said, let's just put this small tax, like a 1% tax on all the rich people as an income tax, and then we won't have to worry about tariffs or stamp duty, all of these other taxes we can just get rid of. Of course, when they brought it in, they didn't get rid of all those other taxes. They just kept them going. And of course, eventually the income tax kind of filtered down until they were saying, if you earn above $2,000 a year, then you have to pay income tax, until the point that everybody's paying income tax. And instead of being 1%, it's like 30 or 50% in some states of the United States. So you can't just tax the rich, not in a political system. It doesn't work like that, because the people who control the system are the rich, and they're going to manipulate the system so it's not them who are paying tax. And that was probably, I get the impression, and there's no way I can prove this, but I get the impression that was probably the plan all along. Just introduce it as a tax on the rich and then have it filtered down.
Watch us again at the Paradise Paradox. Watch us on YouTube, like us on Facebook. Watch us on YouTube, like us on Facebook. Tweet us on Twitter, and listen to us on iTunes or Pocket Casts.
Through all of those years, from the age I was 15 till around the time I was 27 or 28, I never really explored libertarianism that much, except for something on kind of unrelated path of thinking. I started reading Ayn Rand, and my favorite Ayn Rand book is The Fountainhead, which describes this ambitious young architect who never compromises. He has his own ideals of what's good and what's right in architecture, and he won't sacrifice his ideas for anything. He says that a work should have integrity. So those were very inspiring ideas, because it's this idea about entrepreneurialism, that you can create something, and in the book, Ayn Rand makes the case that one man or one human being can change the entire world. He can give the entire world a gift by creating. And that is an idea which ties into libertarianism a lot. It's also about not being controlled. And the idea that government doesn't really come up too much in that book, but that's addressed in another of her books, Atlas Shrugged, where all of the people who are productive in the world end up escaping to another location where they can work in peace and not be bothered by the government, by the government that's trying to squeeze as much out of them as it can. So those ideas started like bubbling around in my brain, and yeah, Ayn Rand is still a very controversial figure, which I guess it goes to show. I mean, maybe you like her work, maybe you don't, but it goes to show that her work still stands a test of time in some respects. Because I always think if something is very divisive like that, some people say it's very good, some people say it's very bad. I say, okay, whatever it is, I know it's interesting.
Good point.
So people are still throwing all kinds of straw men at Ayn Rand and personal attacks, saying she accepted welfare payments and Medicare or whatever it was, which I haven't actually seen any evidence of that. I understand that there isn't actually evidence that she accepted welfare payments.
That's irrelevant.
It's irrelevant to a point, and people use that and say, "Ha, we got you on that one thing, and that makes your entire body of work irrelevant." Well, no, not really. I mean, life doesn't work like that. The ideas are ideas. Ideas are independent of people. It doesn't matter if somebody stupid says something smart. If it's smart, it's smart. I guess it was just a few years ago in 2012. Somebody posted a video of Ron Paul on Facebook and saying, this guy seems like he might actually be onto something. He doesn't seem like a regular politician. And I was kind of bitter or cynical because I thought, a few years before Obama had came out, and I thought, oh, this is something different, something new, some different kind of politician. He's talking about changing things. He seems to be a good guy. He's like talking about ending war. But then when he actually became president, well, he didn't end wars. And yeah, he received the Nobel Peace Prize, but then went on to be the same kind of dude. So I was like, okay, I'm not holding any great hope for American politics of change coming from this presidency. But then I watched the video. And I said, oh, hold on, this guy is actually talking about actual concepts. He's talking about economics. He's actually educating people. He's using the political platform as a way to educate people, which politicians never do. Politicians, normally it's in their interest to keep people stupid or try to avoid the truth or try to obscure the truth. But this guy was trying to show people a path to the truth. So I started listening to a lot of his speeches, and he talks a lot about Austrian economics. So I started to understand, from the time I was 15, I had that idea about personal freedom. But then watching Ron Paul, I started to click in this idea of economic freedom, which I see they're actually both the same thing. Because any way in which you restrict economic freedom, you're actually restricting personal freedom. And it works more or less the other way around as well.
Coming across Ron Paul, because I was never really interested in politics. Like it was all the same game to me. Every politician was the same skeleton in a different shell or wrapped in a different color. But Ron Paul got my attention through some friends that I met in Norway.
Yep.
And one of these guys, he was studying American history. And he sent me a video of one of his speeches and said, check this guy out. He's different. And at the time, it was like, it's not my thing. But it was interesting hearing from the point, just to say someone coming out blank with, we're going down the wrong path.
Yeah.
It was like, irrespective of whether I make it in or not, we're going down the wrong path.
Yeah.
It was like, it was more heartfelt, like, this is not the America that I helped build sort of message. And, that did impact a lot of people, and he had a lot of success. But when you say he was educating people, I never thought about economics as being a way of trapping people.
Trapping them.
Yeah.
Okay.
I never imagined, like, that was never a concept in my mind. Like, I wasn't able to, before Ron Paul, I wasn't able to conceptualize that. Like, I just thought, okay, there's a lot of lazy people that don't work. Like, I was still trapped in that mindset where, someone's homeless. Well, then they messed up their life, didn't they? They should have went to school. They should have studied. They should have did a course or an apprenticeship or something. They should have done something. Like, couldn't they have seen this happening, like, coming before it happened?
Yeah.
And then I realized that a lot of these people are trapped in the system. Because when you get to a position through unexpected happenings, what do you do?
Yeah, and when you don't have the education to bring yourself out of it, that's a problem.
Unfortunately, I feel like these are the majority of people that are being led down these different garden paths.
Yeah,
and it's what government does.
Yep.
That's where you want them to be. And previous to that, religion took that role. Now it's gone through another phase of civilization evolution.
Yeah, well, this is a thing which I bring up sometimes because people say, oh, look at this, it's terrible, all these minimum wage workers, which, by the way, generally people don't stay on the minimum wage for long, but they say, look, this is terrible, these people can't negotiate higher wages, they need help, this is an abomination, this shows how terrible capitalism is. And I say, well, hold on, that's a big leap. That's actually not the case. That's not the fault of capitalism. That's actually the fault of socialism in a lot of countries. Because in Australia, in Mexico, in the United States, in Great Britain, who controls the education system? That's right. It's the government. And even if you go to a private school, it's still mostly like 50% funded by the government. And so the means of production is owned by the state, and that's socialism. When these people come out and they have no job skills and they don't have a way to, they don't have the skills to negotiate a higher wage or look for a better job or start their own business, that is definitely the fault of socialism. It's not really anything to do with capitalism.
An interesting study that I can't quote right now, but what they noticed was with people that were at the bottom of like social economic levels, where most people would think that if they're receiving money, they would go and invest that in drugs or alcohol or other vices they might have.
Okay.
There was a study done recently that actually showed that the majority of people were only resorting to alcohol, for example, as a way of their out for their situation. But when they had the economic freedom to then do something, most of them actually started businesses.
Oh, really?
Like it was a thing. Like most people actually just, they reinvested in doing something to get their wheel moving economically. So I think the majority of people that think that giving money to someone giving money to a bum on the street, well, or you're not giving them enough money for them to do anything but what they're already doing. But you're giving somebody enough money, they know how not to end up back there. Like, like I think most people accept that the public are just uneducated, like a dumbed down, like people that are in trouble are a dumbed down version of society. But that's not the case at all. Most of it's due to, unforeseen circumstances or just mishappenings.
Well, I wonder about that because I see people here in Mexico begging for money and homeless people, and I think, well, hang on. I mean, you live in Mexico. This is the This is a land of opportunity because if you live here in Mexico, say you could beg for a day or maybe you go hungry for a day or two, but you save up enough money to buy a pack of cigarettes. Then you go and stop people at intersections and start selling them loose cigarettes. And then, the next day you buy 2 packets of cigarettes, and before you know it, you're running a corner store. That's how I envision what I would do in that situation. But to me, it seems like if these people aren't bringing themselves out of it, to some extent, they want to be there, or not. That's not exactly the right word, but then they're not willing to push past those tiny hurdles.
I think the same people we're talking about have already given up. Like they might have tried something that didn't work, or they just feel like, what's the point? That's kind of the difference. I think we're coming from a mindset where we'd be willing to try something like that because we know we got a long life ahead of us. There's no way we're going to commit to being a bum. Like, that's just not that's not the option. So we'll do whatever we can to get out. But I feel like in this case, these people, you can see it in their face. These people have given up. They couldn't care less anymore.
Yeah, like they've figured out how to get by in poverty, and that's just a thing.
I just don't understand what they're waiting for.
What do you mean? You think that? That sounds kind of nasty. Like what almost like you're saying they should do away with themselves or something.
Well, not quite that harsh, but I feel like there's only a handful of different types of people. Yeah, and most people are waiting for the return of Messiah, for the second coming of Christ. The rest of us are just waiting to die.
Okay, that's pretty bleak, but yeah, I think you've got a point there.
It's like you need to really think.
Like people get stuck in a 9-to-5 job and they're like running that rat wheel, and they just keep going and going.
And if they go to church on the weekend and they do their prayers, then great.
Yeah.
But if not, well then what's your thing? Like what are you living for?
Yeah.
And if you're living just for the cheap thrills day to day, then you probably should consider how free you're living, because there's bigger thrills out there than just your life.
In one speech by Tyler Durden or Owen Cook, the guy who runs Real Social Dynamics, is like, if we're here, we're doing what we do. I mean, unless we're going to off ourselves tomorrow, we better make the most of it. Like, come on, this is real life. Let's have a good time.
Yeah.
Let's treat it like something real. Let's grab hold of it and suck the pap out of life. Yeah.
It's like nobody wants to die, yet what are you doing today?
Yeah.
It's like, is that really worth it?
Yeah. And I'm guilty of that too.
We all are, but it's once you become, I guess, aware of that, then all of a sudden your life gets bigger, because you're interested in possibly doing something that might help more people, or what that politician in your town is saying might be of some interest. Because I'm looking at the old Aaron that didn't really care much about politics.
Yeah.
Now compared to where I'm at now, it's completely different, because I realize that's going to affect everyone around me.
Yeah.
And my own well-being and economic freedoms.
Yeah. Well, I remember I had one customer and I started chatting to him about politics, and he was like, it's good to hear a young fellow interested in politics. He said, I talk to a lot of people and about politics, and they say, I'm not really that interested. And he says, well, if a guy came up behind you and was sticking his fingers into your hip pocket, would you be interested? Because that's what they're doing.
Well,
press like on YouTube, press like on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, and Pocket Casts. Follow us on Twitter @BattleAZ, @TroubleBubble, and show your support at donate.theparadiseparadox.com.
around that time that I was starting to listen to Ron Paul and listen to his economic arguments about how the state was destructive and manipulated the market, stopped people doing what they really wanted to do and resulted in violence. I was also, my friend Bob Lunn started talking to me about some interesting concepts, which is called the free man movement, or the free man on the land movement, or some people call it being sovereign, or sovereign citizen, which is a kind of absurd term, but this is kind of a
I think it's cool.
well, people say, how can you be both sovereign and a citizen? Because citizen means you're controlled by someone else, but sovereign means you're controlled by yourself. Like independent. My friend Bob started talking to me about these ideas about the law, and there's a lot of people around the world, especially in Canada, but also in the United States and in Australia, who started educating themselves about the law, investigating and saying, well, things like a victimless crime like possession of marijuana, how is it actually a crime? It's under common law. It's not a crime, and we're supposed to be living, well, not here in Mexico. Mexican's a civil law system, but in Australia, in the United States, in Canada, in the UK, and among other countries, it's a common law system, and which means it's based on precedent. The common law system actually originated independently of the government. And the thing is, in common law, of course, if you assault somebody, that's unlawful. And you don't need to write it down in a book to say, like, this person hit me, or you don't need to write down a declaration from a politician saying if you hit somebody else, then you'll get in trouble for that. That is not how common law works, because it starts from more like common sense. Because obviously, if you hit somebody, you cause them damage, or if you're intimidating somebody, that's called assault, like making a reasonable person think that they're likely to get injured. That's assault, and that doesn't require a declaration. Whereas most people think about the law in terms of legislation and declarations, bills passed by parliaments, which is actually so far removed from how law in the UK actually started. It's actually this more decentralized system of law. So the thing was, if you look at it from a kind of critical perspective, you have things in common law, these maxims like everyone is equal before the eyes of the law, which makes sense, and it's even something, it sounds like something you've probably heard many times. But then if you think about it and try to apply it methodically, you start to find things like, well, how come, like a judge can judge a case, or how come a police officer can do something which I can't, and somehow that's legal, but when I do it, it's illegal. Or how come if I start going up to somebody and saying, if you've got something in your pocket, like some kind of prohibited substance, and I put them in handcuffs and lock them in my basement, well, that's illegal or unlawful. But if a police officer does it, it's legal. Well, that's a double standard, and that's obviously defying this maxim of common law that we're all equal under the eyes or before the eyes of the law. I started thinking about that, and I said, well, this also applies to taxes. Like if I go knock on all my neighbors' doors or send them letters saying, hey, you owe me $1,000 because that's 10% of your income, then that would be extortion. And that is extortion. Or fraud, or it could be many things depending on exactly the application. But that's exactly what government does. They send people threatening letters and try to intimidate them. In this free man movement, I mean, there's a lot of garbage and nonsense and conspiracy theories and probably disinformation from governments which gets thrown around, like you can tell sometimes the governments try to launch propaganda campaigns against this type of movement because they're worried, like, what happens if people actually understand the law? And you can watch there's a documentary, or you could call it a documentary. I'm not sure if that title really applies to this nonsense, but a piece by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation where they interview some free men and make them out to be crazy people and terrorists and that sort of stuff. There's a lot of garbage in there. There's a lot of
the documentary. What did it mainly? It just covered guys to make them out looking like they're crazy hippies or something, or
so. Particularly, they interviewed one fellow who claimed he'd been taken advantage of by the free man movement because all of these people had told him that he could get away with not paying off his mortgage or something like that, and he got into a whole heap of trouble. But
perfect.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah, perfect example to throw dirt on them. And then they interviewed Robert Menard, who's a figure in the free man movement, and made him appear like a bit of a wacko, which he is. He's a bit wacky, but he's also I believe he's a good guy, and I believe he's trying to find truth. The thing about it is they will tell you to do things like send documents that have been notarized to the government and tell them, hey, look, I have all these rights and I'm just giving you notice. I have the right to go in public and smoke weed. And some people will do things like write out a whole list of like 1,000 rights that they believe they had and send it to the Attorney General or whatever. And I thought, well, that seems a bit excessive. And then I listened to a fellow named Dean Clifford, who's from Manitoba in Canada, and his ideas seemed to be a lot more clear. And he said, well, why don't you just send them a letter saying, is there anything you claim I cannot do? And so I thought, hey, that seems to make a bit of sense. So I sent a couple of letters. I sent a letter to the Attorney General in Australia and said, well, look, is there anything you're claiming I cannot do? And they sent me a letter back saying, look, I don't know what you're asking. If you've got a problem with your employer, then you can contact them. So they'd taken some words out of context and replied and not answering my question. And I said, okay, well, maybe that's not his position. I sent a letter to the Commissioner of the Australian Taxation Office. 3 or 6 months later, I got a reply from the Deputy Commissioner of the Australian Taxation Office. I'd asked these questions saying, like, what authority do you have to take money from people? Where does this legal authority derive? Where does it originate? And I asked them, these laws or these pieces of legislation that you're claiming apply to me, do you actually have any evidence that they do apply to me? And they wrote back saying, well, for one thing, they never actually answered my question. They never told me any piece of evidence which directly indicated that these pieces of legislation apply to me, other than saying, well, the courts have found that these pieces of legislation stand up and many people are being punished by this legislation in courts of law, which is what you call an appeal to the stick or an appeal to force. Like, yeah, you better do what we're saying, otherwise we'll throw you in jail, which is not really an argument. I mean, I guess it's some kind of evidence of what they're going to do. Basically, it's a threat, but it's not evidence that from the authority that these legislation actually has. And so I read through the letter about 3 times, and I started to realize actually there's nothing in here which addresses my questions. And
so you got a letter back saying basically fall back in line, pay your taxes, or this is what happened to these guys that didn't pay their tax.
More or less, yeah. And the weird thing was, they'd actually said to me, you better pay, or not in these words, but they said, you better pay what's owed or we may initiate legal action. The thing was, I didn't owe them any money. I literally, not by my measure, not by my own wacky free man ideas. By that measure, I didn't owe them any money. But also by their measure, I also didn't owe them any money. I'd already paid the taxes, it was pay-as-you-go tax that got extracted from my paycheck along the way. I didn't owe them anything. I kind of expected that they would actually research what I was talking about, but no, they hadn't looked up my name or my tax number or anything. They just assumed that I was trying to get out of tax, so they sent me a bunch of threats in this letter. So I was like, okay, this is pretty revealing.
Yeah, well,
I'm starting to see
that's not his job. Like the office is just so big, everyone just falls in line with their role.
Yeah.
And then you take that bigger and you realize, well, police have their role.
Yep.
And they have their boss. They should abide by law as well. But it's separate.
Yeah,
Government's separate to law. Banking systems are separate to them both. And it's very common that most people think that all these systems they're all tied together, as in government's looking after us. Better follow the rules.
That's true. Yeah.
I know, because I believe that. For a very long time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're more or less together. I mean, there's supposed to be, a separation of the executive, judicial, and there's supposed to be some kind of separation, but then they end up colluding, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. Like you had a problem once when a police officer took you for doing burnouts or something, and the second police officer lied and said he saw you and all this nonsense. Yeah,
what appeared to have happened, just because I was picked out. I was picked out as an example.
Yeah.
Firstly, I was pulled over as normal night out, random breath test, I thought. Then I was told that I was speeding, which was fine, but where and by how much? There was no data evidence at all. Then I waited. He said, well, it's your lucky day or something, smart ass, you'd expect a cop to say. And then he's like, yeah, just expect a fine in the mail. And I was, at the time, I was probably about early 20s, so, didn't really think to question him about how much was I speeding by, or whether there's a radar involved or what. But about 6 weeks later, I got a fine for informally a burnout, or a Section 5A or 5C offence, which is it's just loss of traction. It's like that's just a loss of traction. So that's about $800 worth then. I mean, I'm talking maybe 10 years ago. No, maybe 8 years ago. So it's like, but the thing was, there was what I thought might have been a cop on his way home after a night out as detective or something. Like, it was an unmarked vehicle at all. It was kind of like a Cadbury's wagon, purple station wagon. Yeah, completely took me off guard. Had no idea what was going on. And then he turned up with like a Cooter Lions jacket. So he was out of uniform and everything. I didn't even saw a badge.
What? So he looked like a speed dealer?
Exactly. hoodie and all.
Okay.
I had no, I didn't, it caught me by surprise. I had no idea what was going on. And then he's like, I thought, is someone playing a joke with me? Like, no fine turned up until 6 weeks later, and it was something completely different. And then I said, well, of course I'm taking this to court. Yeah. And then when I got to court, there was a whole team. Like the police prosecutor was on their side. Yeah. He was all like, putting on his show. The detective's partner, which I never saw at any point, she was never there, had her story. But I mean, there were so many issues with the story. They said that I went left, I went right, my car was blue, green. They didn't know. She wasn't there. And the judge is like, well, it's really your word against 40-something plus years of police work. So...
but there were two of them. One of them had the manufactured story, and
Yeah.
One of them were actually saw.
Yeah, I mean,
well, they both had manufactured stories, but one of them was actually there.
Yeah, the thing was, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, I was able to bring attention to the fact that there was nothing there, but how am I supposed to ask the police? Like, how could I prove? At the time, I represented myself because I didn't think it was going to be such a big deal.
Yeah.
I really I didn't understand the process.
Yeah.
But looking back now, of course, I would have requested reports, time sheets, logs for the books, all that sort of stuff that I guess a lawyer would have done straight away. And just seeing that presence of a professional might have had the whole case thrown out before it even started. But of course, a young guy who's going to be able to pull that kind of money to have to put a case together. Maybe I should have done it. But either way, it didn't change anything.
Yeah.
Like it was thrown out, but it wasn't. I really don't know what happened to that. I didn't pay any fines or anything. I just left it.
Oh, really?
Okay. I said, you know what? I'm going to Mexico next week. This is like the first trip back over. This is the first trip over here.
Okay, so now you've got a permanent black marker. This was like 7 years ago, 8 years ago.
Yeah, like 8 years ago. Something interesting.
Happened. Okay.
Just last year, I went to get my license renewed, and it's interesting because I thought I don't even know how many points I've got. I really don't care. I've got my license. I'm going to keep doing what I want anyway. I went to the RTA to get my license renewed, and they gave me a half price discount. And they said because I've had no infringements in the last 5 years. So they gave me a discount. So I don't know, maybe the RTA and the police their systems don't even connect. I don't know. Just complete IT incompetence.
Okay.
Could be.
Yeah, fair enough. Sometimes magistrates will give prosecutors a free pass. They'll just overlook things. And I'll get into my story, my experience with the court system in the following episode. But so the thing was, I sent this letter. I got this letter back from the ATO, not answering any of my questions. And my initial expectation was, well, I guess I had a few contrary expectations. Like, I was like, okay, well, if they just sent me a letter and they explain everything clearly, this is how the authority is derived, I'll be like, oh, okay, so I guess that's fine. And I guess it's legit, and I guess that makes sense. That on one level, I was expecting that. And when I first received the letter and read it through the first time, I thought, oh, okay, I guess that does kind of make sense. But upon the second and third reading, I was like, no, actually, that doesn't make sense. They haven't answered any of my questions. All they've done is threaten me like 2 or 3 times and told me that they'll never reply to me again. And it's written this language, like it's saying, we've come to a point where we think that it's not necessary or productive or fruitful to continue with this conversation, and we won't be replying any further. This is our department's resources, and looking at it later, I was like, well, hang on, your department's resources? Yeah, your department's resources are there to actually answer my questions. That's what your job is supposed to be. So upon further analysis, I started to think, well, hang on, these people are actually thugs. And they're trying to use this highfalutin language to disguise the fact of what they're doing, but they can't answer my questions. They can't tell me why I have to pay them money, but they're just very sure that I should, and they're very sure that they'll do something nasty to me if I don't. So the things started to click into my mind.
They really don't know.
Yeah. They really don't know, and it's this very compliance-based mentality. They're like cogs in a machine. They will do what they're told. They never stopped once to question why they're actually there, and that is definitely a weird thing about it, because I can't imagine exactly what goes on in these people's heads. I like to play a game sometimes if I have to call up a bureaucrat and I'm going to ask them a few of these questions. I'm like, okay, how long is it going to be? I'll start the timer going, how long is it going to be before this guy tells me something like, look, that's just the way it is. Look, you just have to pay. Look, this conversation is over. I'm not here to argue with you. That's one they love to say that. I'm not here to argue with you. And I'm like, well, hang on. I'm not actually presenting an argument. An argument is a bunch of premises that leads to a conclusion. I'm asking you a question. what authority do you have? And they say, I'm not here to argue with you. They say that so often. It's disgusting. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm just here to threaten you and intimidate you.
That poor little bugger. He's just trying to work. He's got his kids at home. He gets paid his level. I don't know, the government pay.
Yeah, nice cushy government job. Work for the government for your entire life, and you don't have to think. Here in Mexico, I'm more sympathetic because I know people have to work and get by. Like your uncles, bureaucrats, and and they do some stuff which, if they really had a better position, they wouldn't be doing.
Well, nearly all my family and now newer family are all in government jobs. I look at it like a work for the dole kind of system.
Yeah.
It's like, what else is there?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, hopefully they can do some good. But yeah, I'd much prefer to deal with a Mexican bureaucrat because you can negotiate with them. Australian bureaucrats, no, they're very straight down the line. Like, these are the rules. If you don't like it, and that's the other thing. Because I brought these topics of conversation up over the dinner table with my family a couple of years ago. And you might imagine it didn't go over so well. I started telling them, well, what the government is actually doing is contrary to common law. I don't think they actually have the authority to impose these taxes. Like, if they have the authority, where does it come from? And I can't see any rational basis for this. And my sister-in-law and my brother started getting very angry at me, started getting very agitated, and I was like, this is kind of weird. And it was strange too, because I'd mentioned, hey, I sent the ATO these documents and I got this response. They didn't actually answer any of my questions. It's weird, right? If I were in my brother or my sister-in-law's position, I would be like, really? Oh, show me the documents. I want to see. Let's investigate. Let's see what's really up. Yeah. But no, nobody at the dinner table asked me for it.
What do you think that is? Like, is that a compliance, or is that just I'm living my own life and it's got nothing to do with me?
It does have something to do with.
Well, that's the
my
issue.
sister-in-law is a bureaucrat. She works for the government teaching kids. So she's like, from what, and this is like a bit of pop psychology here, but this is like people identify with the government in some way. People identify with the government as, they say, this is my parent, this is my father figure or my mother figure. The government's there to take care of me. And I've heard this expression, it's very difficult to get someone to see something when their livelihood depends on them not seeing it. So it's difficult for my sister-in-law to start saying, oh, actually, I work for a criminal organization. I mean, for me, actually, that would be, even if I were in that position, I would still say, okay, well, I can accept that, but then, I might have to look at changing my life or something like that. But for her, and for a lot of people, especially in Australia and in the United States, they're locked in this frame, and if something enters and they don't like it, they shut it out. And I don't know, maybe I never brought it up again, because she ended up telling me something like, well, look, this is how it works in this country, and if you don't like it, you can just get out of the country.
Like now or tomorrow?
Yeah. Wait, hold on. When did you become the dictator of Australia, right? I thought this is supposed to be a free country. Suddenly, free speech isn't allowed, and I have to leave the country if I say something contrary to your opinion. But that's the kind of mentality that people have in Australia, like, get into line or get out. And I don't really know where it originates, but I'm sure it has something to do with being schooled by the government, being educated by the government. But I also wonder, why doesn't that affect me to that extent? Why don't I have that mentality? And I guess it's from some intense and weird experiences that I've had that have actually deprogrammed me. That's something to do with it.
Yeah, I think maybe the track record of experiences don't allow people like us to fall into those roles. Because if I was to fall into one of those roles and I was comfortable, the question is, would we continue to think the way we think now, or would that ability dissolve? Personally, I really enjoy talking about this because I can see, it lets me reflect on my own experience for one. Hearing the way you came through your experiences into this understanding, it allows me to realize like what were the critical points for me personally as well. And it is when you realize the separation of these departments, of these organizations and the purposes they have, the combination of the separation of the departments and their purposes, and how they're not all working for you. They're not all working for the one goal. They all have their own little objective.
Yes.
And sometimes it's scary to think that these are out of control bodies of people that are sleeping inside these big shells we call government, or we call system of authority, the police, or the banking system. These are all controlling units that are exploiting the people.
Well, I remember Thomas Sowell, the economist Thomas Sowell, tells a story where this was like a light bulb moment for him. He was working in a government department. He was like fresh out of university. And the government department had something to do with the minimum wage. And he said, well, I'm going to start doing some research. I'm going to look into this and see if the minimum wage actually improves conditions for people. And everybody in the department was like, what? You're going to do what? Like, if you... devil. Yeah.
The worst.
Well, the Satan, the questioner,
exactly.
the devil's advocate, because if he starts asking these questions and he gets the unpalatable answers, then that means he's going to prove that their department is unnecessary and actually contrary to their stated goal.
You see, the scary part is that people that are inside that are aware. I find is they're just creepy, slimy people.
Ah, okay. You mean people are aware that it's terrible and they're like, I'm going to run with this. I'm going to take advantage. Yeah.
It's like, I'm shut down my own personal, like I don't have a personal view. Feelings, I don't give a shit. And I'm gonna run this system the best way I can to go up through the ranks and get nice and comfortable. Yeah. Like that's kind of the majority of presidents, isn't it? Like that's kind of...
Probably.
The vice president.
Hard to say. Yeah.
Was he going to do less and get paid nearly equally as well?
True. All right. Well, we're going to we'll break this up into another section, so we'll continue next time. So my name's Kurt Robinson.
My name's Aaron Battle.
This is the Paradise Paradox. So have a look at theparadiseparadox.com. Press like on YouTube. Press like on Facebook. Press subscribe on YouTube. And follow us on Twitter @TroubleBubble.
Just get amongst it. And at Battle AZ. But I'm thinking, I don't really care which way you get contact with us. I mean, if you're on the website, that's perfect. Yeah,
get in touch, leave a comment on the website. And you can subscribe to us on iTunes and also on Pocket Casts. And also show your support. We suggest a donation of $1 per episode that you listen to and like. So go to donate.theparadiseparadox.com and you can donate by a Bitcoin or by some altcoins as well. And have a good one. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.
Peace. I was thinking, how do you